Eternal Dominion was more than a warship. It was an empire's greatest argument. 3 kilometers of armored steel and auric titanium plating drifted through the darkness of space like a moving fortress. Its vast hull lined with 47 plasma lance batteries, powerful enough to crack continents. More than 11,000 officers and soldiers served aboard the vessel, each sworn by blood to the Breath Emperor, and each convinced they sailed aboard the most unstoppable weapon ever created. History seemed to agree. The Eternal Dominion had erased 4 planetary civilizations from existence. It had shattered 2 interstellar governments without suffering anything more serious than superficial damage to its outer armor. Entire fleets had surrendered the moment its silhouette appeared on long-range scanners. Governments signed unconditional surrender before it even entered orbit. Fear always arrived before the ship did. Today, its guns were aimed at Earth. On the forward observation deck, High Commander Seth Varel stood with his hands clasped behind his back, calmly watching the blue planet grow larger against the stars. It looked insignificant, a young world, an inexperienced civilization, a species that had barely begun exploring the galaxy. The tactical officers around him spoke with the quiet confidence of people discussing an exercise rather than an invasion. Estimated resistance, minimal. Probability of victory, absolute. Time required to secure planetary surrender, less than 24 hours. Seth allowed himself a faint smile. This, he said quietly, will be remembered as the easiest campaign in Breath history. No one on the bridge disagreed, because no one aboard the Eternal Dominion had ever fought humans before, and no one had bothered to ask why Earth had made no attempt to negotiate, his 4 amber eyes scanning the blue-green marble hanging in the void below him. Primitive, soft, wet, the planet looked like something you'd find in a natural history archive. The kind of world younger species romanticized before they learned the universe's first and only real law. Power is the only language worth speaking. Confirm population count, he said, clasping his scaled hands behind his back. His aide, Subcommander Iris, consulted her data slate. Approximately 8 billion, sir, concentrated mostly on the surface. No orbital infrastructure of military significance. Their most advanced warship is a fusion drive frigate, carrying chemical propellant projectile weapons. She paused. Chemical propellant, sir. They are still using controlled explosions to accelerate metal. A ripple of amusement moved through the bridge crew. Seth Varel allowed himself a thin smile. And yet the Galactic Accord requires we offer terms before bombardment. His tone carried the same enthusiasm one might reserve for bureaucratic paperwork. Hail them. Already attempted, sir, they responded. In what language? Theirs, sir. But our translators are calibrated. The message was Iris hesitated, which was unusual. Iris did not hesitate. She had survived 3 campaigns and 2 political purges. Hesitation was not in her profile. The message was a name, sir, a single human name, and the phrase, and she's already on her way. Seth Varel turned from the window. The proximity alert screamed. Every head on the bridge snapped to the tactical display. A single vessel had just dropped out of FTL approximately 400 meters off their port bow, so close that the gravitational shear from its emergence wave rocked the Eternal Dominion like a dinghy in a storm. 11,000 soldiers grabbed for handholds. Plasma arrays swiveled automatically toward the new contact. 3 gunners fired on reflex before their supervisors screamed at them to stand down. The shots hit nothing. The vessel had already moved. It was small, impossibly small for something that had just executed a micro-jump with that level of precision. A needle-shaped craft barely 40 meters long, matte black with no visible weapon ports, no energy signature that matched any known human technology, and markings along its flank, written in a script that the Breath translators couldn't immediately parse. Scan it, Seth Varel said. His voice was controlled. His hearts, all 3 of them, were not scanning. Sir, The whole material is reading as the sensor operator trailed off. Sir, I don't have a classification for this material. It's absorbing our scan beams. I'm getting nothing back. Life signs. 1. 1. Seth Varel stared at the sleek black needle floating beside his 3-kilometer warship like a splinter next to a sword. 1 life sign, 1 human. Having just performed a faster-than-light jump with a precision his own best navigators couldn't match aboard a ship his sensors couldn't read, that had appeared from nowhere and was now simply hovering there, patient and quiet, as though waiting for someone to open a door. "Open a channel," he said. The main screen flickered, and for the first time in his 30-year military career, High Commander Seth Varel of the Vreth Imperial Navy felt something he hadn't felt since childhood. He felt like he was the one being watched. The face that appeared on screen was human, female by their species categorization, though the Vreth had always found the mammalian distinction difficult to process at a glance. She appeared to be in the mid-range of the human lifespan, which their files indicated was somewhere between 30 and 50 standard cycles. Her hair was dark, pulled back severely from a face that carried no readable expression whatsoever. No fear, no aggression, no submission. She wore no uniform Seth Farrell recognized. She sat in what appeared to be a small cockpit, alone, with a cup of something steaming in her left hand. She was drinking something hot while floating 400 meters from the most powerful warship in the known galaxy. "Commander Seth Varel," she said. The translator rendered her words cleanly, which meant she had spoken in breath. Perfect, unaccented breath. "My name is Dr. Mara Voss. Earth has authorized me to receive your terms of surrender." The bridge went absolutely silent. Seth Varel blinked all 4 eyes. A breath reflex of disorientation he hadn't displayed in public since he was a cadet. "I believe you have the situation reversed, Dr. Voss. It is your planet that will be offering surrender." She took a sip of her drink. "Is that the position you'd like to lock into? Because I want to make sure I document your choices accurately for the tribunal." "What tribunal?" Maravos set down her cup, reached off-screen for something, and when her hand came back, it was holding a data chip between 2 fingers, which she held up toward the screen with the casual patience of someone showing a receipt to a store clerk. "The Galactic Accord Tribunal, Article 44, Subsection 9. Unprovoked military aggression against pre-Kant Class 4 civilizations." She tilted the chip slightly. "You declared war on us 6 weeks ago, Commander. Earth had no sitting ambassador to the Empire, no diplomatic representation, no prior conflict, and no vote in any governing body that affected Breth interests under the accord which your Emperor signed in his own blood 17 years ago. That makes this an extermination campaign which is a Class 1 violation." She paused. "There are 47 other species watching this conversation right now through relay stations we positioned last month. Hello, everyone." The communications officer turned slowly towards Seth Varel with an expression of pure alarm. "Sir, she's right. We're detecting passive relay signals on 6 different Accord-monitored frequencies. This conversation is being broadcast across." "I know what a relay signal is, Seth," Varel said quietly. Mara Voss picked her cup back up. "I'm going to be honest with you, Commander, because I think you're a practical person, and I respect that. The Empire has 3 options right now. Option 1, you open fire on me, which will be broadcast live to 47 civilizations, completing the evidence package for a full Accord sanctions event that will freeze every Breth trade route within 60 days. Option 2, you fire on Earth. Same outcome but with the additional charge of confirmed genocide, which historically triggers a coalition military response. And I've checked the math. You do not want a coalition response right now given your current fuel reserves in the outer sectors." She paused just long enough. "Option 3, you talk to me." Seth Varel stared at her for a very long time. Behind him, he heard Subcommander Iris whisper something to the sensor operator. He couldn't make out the words, but he heard the sensor operator's response, which was a single, very quiet breath profanity. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. Maravos smiled for the first time. It didn't reach her eyes. "Commander," she said, "we've been planning this since you declared war. The silence on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was the kind that had weight to it. Jeff Viral had commanded warships for 30 years. He had walked onto the bridges of defeated enemies while they were still burning. He had received news of his own brother's death in combat without flinching. Because flinching was a luxury, the Imperial Navy did not permit its commanders. But standing there staring at a single human female, calmly drinking something warm, while his entire campaign strategy unraveled around him like a poorly stitched garment, he was finding control of his expression somewhat harder than usual. "You said you've been planning since we declared war," he said. "That was 6 weeks ago, correct? You built that ship in 6 weeks. Maravos glanced around her cockpit with an expression of mild amusement. "This? No, this is significantly older. We just hadn't needed it yet." Seth Varel filed that away. Humans had faster-than-light technology they hadn't needed yet. He filed that directly next to the growing pile of things his pre-invasion intelligence briefings had gotten catastrophically wrong. The relay network, he said, 47 civilizations. That took longer than 6 weeks to negotiate. It did. Then you were planning before we declared war. We were planning before you decided to declare war. Yes, she said it without any particular emphasis, which somehow made it worse. The declaration was a formality. Your fleet movements were not subtle, Commander. We had about 4 months of warning. Plenty of time. He turned slightly, just enough to see Iris in his peripheral vision. She was studying her data slate with the fixed intensity of someone who needed somewhere to look that wasn't at him. He turned back. "What do you actually want, Dr. Voss?" "Officially, I want a formal ceasefire agreement signed under Accord protocol with independent verification. I want the withdrawal of Imperial forces from this sector within 30 standard days. I want reparations set at the standard Article 44 rate, which your legal office can calculate. I'll wait, and I want a formal apology entered into the Accord public record." She paused unofficially. "Yes. I want you to go home and tell your emperor that the war is over. It never really started, and that the next time the Empire considers targeting a precon species for annexation, someone in the room should ask whether that species has been watching you for longer than you've been watching them." Z. Varel's jaw tightened. "You're describing an intelligence operation of considerable scope and resources. Humans have had no formal presence in Accord space, no embassies, no representatives, no visible representatives," Mara said. "There's a difference." Another silence longer this time. He had been briefed on humans. He had read the files himself. Dense documents full of the usual pre-annexation intelligence, population data, military capability assessments, resource valuations, projected resistance timelines. The files had described a species in the early stages of interstellar development, industrious, somewhat aggressive by mammalian standards, technologically promising, but generations behind the galactic average. The projected resistance timeline for a full invasion had been listed as 11 days. 11. His staff had treated it almost as a training exercise. The files had said nothing about this. "Who are you?" he asked. "Not as a commander. Almost as a person. I told you. Dr. Mara Voss. That's a name. I'm asking what you are." She looked at him steadily. "I'm the person they sent. Why you specifically?" For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, something quieter. "Because I asked to come," she said it simply with no drama. And that simplicity was more unsettling than any threat could have been, because it meant she had wanted to be here alone, 400 meters from a warship that could vaporize her in a fraction of a second. She had asked for this, and the question that followed immediately, the question Seth Viral could not stop himself from forming, was what kind of person asks for this, and what does it mean for us that they sent her anyway? "I need to consult with my officers," he said finally. "Of course I'll be here." She picked her cup back up, realized it was empty, and reached off-screen to refill it from something. "Take your time." He muted the channel, turned. His senior officers were watching him with expressions ranging from controlled alarm to barely concealed awe, which on a breath military bridge was extraordinary. Iris stepped forward and spoke quietly. "Sir, she's right about the relay network. I've confirmed 22 active feeds. The other 25 are likely encrypted. This is being watched. I know the legal office is running the Article 44 numbers. Preliminary figure is. She glanced at her slate. It's significant, sir. How significant? Iris told him. He didn't visibly react, but one of his aides made a small, involuntary sound. There's more, Iris continued. The sensor team has been running passive analysis on Dr. Voss's vessel since she arrived. No weapons detected, no shielding we can categorize, but they found something in the hull resonance pattern. What? Iris looked at him steadily. The material is consistent with Accord-certified diplomatic immunity shielding. Class Omega, it's the same material used on the Emperor's personal shuttle, sir. Class Omega shielding was not something a species built in 6 weeks. It was not something a pre-Kant species should have known existed, and it was certainly not something they should have been able to manufacture without a minimum of 3 decades of metallurgical development and an Accord-certified foundry license. Seth Variel turned back to the screen unmuted. Mara Voss looked up from her refilled cup. "Where did you get Class Omega shielding?" he asked. "Traded for it," she said. "With whom friends? Humans don't have friends in Accord space. Humans have no formal visible relationships," she said again patiently. "Commander, I understand this is uncomfortable. You came here expecting a very specific kind of conversation, and you're having a completely different one. I don't say that to embarrass you. Your intelligence operation was competent by conventional standards. We just didn't present conventional surfaces." She sat down her cup for the second time, and her voice shifted slightly. Still calm, still measured, but with a new layer underneath it, something steady and absolute. The voice of someone who had already seen how this ends. "I want you to understand something. Earth is not asking you to leave because we're afraid of you. We're asking you to leave because we've done the analysis, and a war between our species ends badly for both of us, and we'd prefer not to go through it. That's not weakness. That's math. You're a pre-Kant species with 1 operational warship and 8 billion ground-based. We have 1 visible warship," she said. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion went very quiet again. Iris beside him began rapidly issuing orders to the sensor array team in a low, urgent voice. Seth Verrill looked at the woman on his screen, alone in a 40-meter ship, surrounded by his fleet, telling him what she had and had not chosen to show him. And the cold that settled in his chest wasn't anger. It was recognition. He had met negotiators before, hundreds of them across dozens of species, diplomats who wept, who blustered, who bargained desperately, and clung to technicalities. He had never met one who sat across from annihilation and narrated it like a weather forecast, which meant she already knew the weather. "Iris," he said quietly. "Already scanning, sir. Long range, full spectrum." He waited. Maravos waited with him, perfectly comfortable in the silence, as if she had nowhere else to be. The sensor report came back in 40 seconds. Iris read it again, then turned to him with the expression of someone who had just found out the ground beneath them was hollow. "Sir," she said, "I'm reading thermal signatures. Deep space, outer system boundary, dormant signatures. They're cold, running minimum power." She paused. "I count, sir. I count 31 contacts, possibly more. Some of them are very well masked. 31 ships, cold and dark and patient, sitting at the edge of the system waiting. Configuration?" he asked. Iris's voice was completely flat. "Unknown, sir. Nothing in the database matches." He turned back to the screen one more time. Mara Voss had her cup raised halfway to her lips. She lowered it slowly when she saw his face. 31, he said. "You were always going to find them," she said. "We wanted you to find them at the right moment." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you ready to talk about terms, Commander?" The negotiation took 11 hours. That number would later become famous. 11 hours to dismantle the groundwork of what had been projected as a 2-week annexation campaign. Officers on the Eternal Dominion would describe it differently depending on when they were asked. Immediately after, many of them called it a tactical retreat, a strategic recalibration, a necessary repositioning in light of new intelligence. 6 months later, in private, several of the same officers would use a different word. Maravos sat in her cockpit for the entire 11 hours. She did not take breaks that anyone could observe. She refilled her cup twice. She did not raise her voice. She never made a threat that she didn't immediately quantify with a specific legal citation, a historical precedent, or a number. She was, by every measurable standard, the calmest person in a several million kilometer radius. It nearly broke Seth Varal's senior legal counsel. Commander Heiss-Peath was the finest legal mind in the Imperial Navy. She had drafted annexation frameworks for 9 different planetary acquisitions. She had argued before the Accord Tribunal twice and won both cases. She had, on the second day of her career, correctly identified a 3-word ambiguity in an Accord subsection that had saved the Empire 4 trillion credits in disputed territorial claims. She was not a woman who lost arguments about Accord law. Maravos had spent the first 40 minutes of formal negotiations correcting her. Not aggressively, not triumphantly. The way a teacher corrects a student who is bright and genuinely mistaken, with patience and specificity, citing exact clause numbers and the amendment dates that altered them, twice referencing decisions from tribunal cases that Hepeth had not been aware existed, and doing all of this in flawless Accord formal register, which was an archaic dialect that most modern breath lawyers used imperfectly, and that Maravos apparently spoke like a native. By the 3rd hour, Heathpath had stopped arguing the foundational points and begun trying to negotiate the variables. By the 6th hour, she had stopped trying to shift the framework at all and was focused entirely on minimizing the numbers. By the 9th hour, she had developed a faint tic in her left secondary eyelid that her colleagues had never seen before. Seth Varal watched all of this and said very little, partly because his legal counsel was handling the technical details more effectively than he could, and partly because he was using the time to do something that felt increasingly like the most important thing he had done in this entire campaign. He was studying Maravos, not her words. Her words were precise, documented, legally sound. He could review transcripts later. He was studying the way she negotiated, the rhythm of it, where she pushed and where she waited, which concessions she accepted immediately and which ones she let sit for a while before agreeing. The long pauses that he gradually realized were not uncertainty, but pressure, giving the other side time to hear the silence and fill it with anxiety. She never bluffed without a foundation. Every position she took that seemed extreme turned out within the hour to be supported by something she had already positioned. A relay broadcast, a legal precedent, a sensor contact at the edge of the system that his team was still trying to classify. She had built this whole structure in advance, every piece of it, and she had walked into the most dangerous room available to a single human being and calmly begun taking it apart from the inside, not with weapons, but with the architecture she had installed before the door opened. At hour 7, during a recess that Heathpath had requested for what she described as legal review, but which Seth Varel recognized as recovery, he went to his private observation alcove, sealed the door, and stood looking out at the Black Needle ship floating off his port. His intelligence files had described humans as a promising but underdeveloped species, industrious, somewhat aggressive, technologically behind the galactic average. The files had been built by observers. He understood that now. They had watched humanity from a distance, cataloged what was visible, and built profiles from surfaces. And humanity, it turned out, had a remarkable talent for presenting exactly the surface that served them best. He thought about the 31 cold ships at the edge of the system, sitting there in the dark for how long? Weeks? Months? A species that hadn't needed FTL until recently? That had no visible presence in Accord space, that had apparently been quietly, patiently, invisibly building. What exactly? He wasn't sure. He wanted the complete answer. When Heathpath returned to the channel, she had composed herself and had a counter-proposal ready on the reparations figure. A sophisticated argument involving inflation indexing and sector-based economic variance that Seth Varal thought was genuinely clever. Maravos listened to the entire argument, made 2 small notes, and then said that methodology was specifically excluded by the Accord Financial Tribunal in the Kesseran Ruling Standard Cycle 7241. The exclusion is in Appendix C of that decision. Footnote 17. I can forward you a copy if your records are incomplete. Heathpath's eyelid tick came back. The final agreement signed in the 11th hour under Accord Formal Protocol with 22 confirmed relay broadcasts as witness contained 4 primary terms: full ceasefire, sector withdrawal within 30 days, reparations at the standard Article 44 rate, and a formal apology to be entered into the Accord public record within 14 days under the Emperor's seal. When Highspath finished reading the terms back for the record, Maravus said, confirmed. "Thank you, Commander Highspath. You argued well. It was not sarcastic. That made it worse somehow." Seth Varel reopened his personal channel in the final minutes, when the administrative work was winding down. Maravos looked for the first time slightly tired, a looseness around her eyes, a slower cadence in her movements that suggested 11 hours of sustained precision had cost her something, even if she'd never let it show. "A question," he said. "Not for the record." She looked at him. "Go ahead. The 31 ships at the system edge. Who built them?" "Built." She was quiet for a moment. "Then we did. Humans. Humans. In what time frame?" She held his gaze. "That's 2 questions." He accepted that. "One more. Then if we had fired, if we had opened the bombardment instead of answering your hail." "You were never going to do that," she said. "You couldn't have known. I knew your record," she said. 30 years of campaigns. You've never fired on a diplomatic contact, even enemy ones, even when it would have been tactically advantageous." She tilted her head slightly. "I didn't come out here because I was brave, Commander. I came out here because I'd done the research." He stared at her. "You chose me," he said slowly. "Not the target. You chose me specifically as the commander to negotiate with." "The Empire chose you to lead this fleet," she said. "We decided that was a workable choice." It landed like a stone dropped into still water. They had not merely predicted the invasion, they had predicted the commander, studied him, assessed him, determined that he was the right variable, the one most likely, when presented with a complete architecture of disadvantage, to make the rational decision instead of the proud one. They had aimed the entire operation at him personally. "What if you'd been wrong?" he asked. "About me?" Maravos was quiet for a long moment. "Then the 31 ships weren't just for optics," she said. The channel closed. The Eternal Dominion left the Sol system 29 days later, 6 hours ahead of the Accord deadline. The fleet it had brought, 14 vessels in total, the finest strike group the Empire had assembled in a decade, followed in tight formation, their drive signatures clean and logged with the Accord monitoring station that had been per the treaty terms established in the outer system. Neutral observers, 3 different species, all of them watching. None of the ships had fired a shot. Sheth Faral stood at the observation deck for the last time as Earth shrank behind him. That blue-green marble growing smaller, then becoming indistinguishable from the other points of light. He stayed there longer than was strictly useful. His officers gave him the space to do it. The report he would file with the Emperor was already drafted. It was accurate. Accord violations, legal exposure, coalition risk, intelligence failures at the source level. All of it was true. All of it framed the retreat as the rational choice, which it was. The Emperor's advisors would review it, challenge parts of it, eventually accept it because the alternative, disputing the Accord record in front of 47 witnessing civilizations, would cost more than the retreat. The apology would be filed under the Emperor's seal, as required 14 days from now, in language that had already been approved by the Accord's own formatting office. Maravos had submitted the formatting template in advance. He had found that out in the final hours from Heath, who had discovered it while reviewing the Accord filing requirements. The template had been submitted 4 weeks ago, before the Eternal Dominion had even entered the system, before negotiations had been formally opened, before anyone had confirmed there would be negotiations at all. Because the template assumed the specific outcome, assumed the specific language of the apology, and had pre-formatted it to ensure smooth processing by the Accord registry. She had filed the apology paperwork before the war ended. Before the war was decided, Hepath had delivered this information with the specific look of someone who had lost a game and had only just found the rulebook that explained why they never had a chance. Sheth Farrell had read the report 3 times, sat with it, and then done something that surprised even himself. He had laughed, not with humor exactly, something adjacent to it, the laugh of a man who has been beaten by something genuinely extraordinary and has enough self-awareness to acknowledge it. The fleet crossed the system boundary. The Accord monitoring station confirmed their exit. The relay feeds, which had run continuously for 11 hours during negotiations and had then shifted to a summary format for the withdrawal period, logged the departure and transmitted confirmation to all 22 primary witness stations. Seth Vera left the observation deck and went to his office. On his desk was a physical data chip, delivered in the final minutes before the fleet's departure by a small automated courier drone that had emerged from nowhere, deposited the chip on the Eternal Dominion shuttle bay floor, and vanished before anyone could tag its trajectory. The chip contained a single document, and the document was addressed to him by name. He had read it twice already. He read it a third time now. It was brief, 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph was a formal acknowledgement of the ceasefire and an expression of what it called in careful diplomatic language mutual respect for the prudence shown by both parties. Standard language, gracious without being effusive. The second paragraph was less standard. It noted that Earth maintained an interest in normalized relations with the Verith Empire, that the Accord framework provided adequate mechanisms for such normalization, and that Earth would welcome the appointment of a formal imperial ambassador at Earth's discretion. It noted with the same mild precision that characterized everything Maravos had ever said to him, that this offer would remain open for 18 standard months, and then lapse if not taken up. 18 months, not indefinitely, not forever, a specific window, with a specific closing date, because even the offer of goodwill had been structured with a deadline. The third paragraph was 4 sentences. It was not diplomatic language. It was direct, personal, and written in a voice he recognized immediately. You made a rational choice under pressure. That is rarer than it sounds. The galaxy remembers the commanders who chose correctly at the hard moment. We will. No signature, no title, just those 4 sentences, and below them a small printed image. The Earth from orbit, exactly as he had seen it from his observation deck. He sat with the chip for a long time. The empire he served had spent 3 centuries building the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. 47 planetary systems under the imperial flag, 11,000 ships, an economy that stretched across 6 sectors. The VTH were by almost every measure that the galaxy recognized a dominant civilization. They moved when they chose to move, and stopped when they chose to stop. And a single human woman in a 40-meter ship he couldn't scan had parked beside the most powerful warship in that civilization's arsenal, had a cup of something warm, and had restructured the terms of an entire war before he'd understood the war had already been fought. He turned the chip over in his fingers. He thought about the intelligence files, promising but underdeveloped, technologically behind the galactic average, 11 days to full capitulation. He thought about the 47 relay stations prepositioned before the fleet arrived. He thought about 31 dark ships at the edge of a system, cold and patient. He thought about a diplomatic immunity hall built from materials that required decades of metallurgical development, traded for by a species with no visible presence in Accord space. He thought about friends that weren't visible, relationships that weren't public, a species that had been building something in the dark and had not yet chosen to fully show what it was. He thought about 4 months of warning they had allegedly had. He thought about the word allegedly and about how little he actually knew and about how much it was possible he still didn't. Seth Varall placed the data chip in his personal document archive, locked it under his private key, composed a brief addendum to his report, 2 sentences flagged for the Emperor's personal attention, noting that the pre-invasion intelligence assessment of Earth should be considered categorically compromised and recommending strongly that no further action be taken against that system under any pretext until a full and independent reassessment was complete. He noted in the same addendum that such reassessment should be conducted by someone with no previous assumptions about the target, using entirely new methodology, with particular focus on non-visible infrastructure and long-horizon strategic preparation. He did not write the word afraid anywhere in the addendum. It was not a word that appeared in imperial military correspondence, but he thought it, sitting there in his sealed office with the fleet humming around him, and Earth falling further behind with every second. Not afraid of the 31 ships, not afraid of the legal mechanisms and the relay broadcasts and the pre-filed apology templates, afraid of the patience, of the scope of it, of what it meant that they had built all of that and then sent one person, not a fleet, not a threat. One person with a cup of something warm and 4 months of careful preparation and the absolute unshakable calm of someone who already knew the outcome, afraid of what they were still choosing not to show.